Hi there everybody, Kathy Syrett from the Confident Leader Journey here. So I thought it was about time we looked at some of the myths of psychology, and especially some of the popular psychology. So there's a couple of things that human beings tend to do, and one is we like to simplify things to make them easy to understand. And in doing that, sometimes we oversimplify and we remove some of the nuances of the research that's actually been done. I've probably been guilty of that, or as guilty of that as anybody in some of the vlogs I've been doing. So I'm happy to get comments from you pointing out where I might have done that. And in fact, using the word myth is a deliberate choice here for me, because Sir Karl Popper, who was a great philosopher about science, in 1957 he said, "Science must begin with myths and with the criticism of myths." And if you have known anything from watching some of my vlogs, you'll know that I like to base a lot of my vlogs on science, what we know, what the evidence is. However, sometimes getting hold of that science can be quite challenging. I mean, we all know what the media does with research reports. So there might be a report and one little thing in it says that chocolate affects the serotonin levels in your brain. So chocolate makes you feel good becomes the headline. And in fact, the research showed that it increased it by one micro level. It's not statistically significant. But the press, because their goal is to sell papers, will pick on that and put that as a headline. And it's very difficult to get hold of the actual study to look at that for yourselves. So there'll be an occasional series here where every now and again I'll pick a myth and we'll explore it. And if there's a myth you'd like me to explore, please pop the question on the Facebook page. The Confident Leader Journey community is our group, which you can join, and then you can ask any questions you like. Now, I would also like to refer you to there's the Applied Neuroscience Association, which also is going about popping some of the myths, looking at the neuroscience of what happens. So they're very up to date. So the ANA is a very good organization for going to and looking at some of those myths. Okay. So one of the things that I think it's important to do is to always challenge any absolute you see in a title. So in this vlog, we're going to look at the principles of how to spot a myth and how to spot a misreported piece of research. Now, some of you may know there are some writers who specialize in doing this, but one of the best books is to start off with is 50 Great Myths of Popular Psychology, shattering widespread misconceptions about human behavior. Well, I think shattering's a bit over the top, but what they do is they look at some of the most common myths that are out there in popular psychology. Now, the reason this is important for us as leaders is because these popular psychology myths are used in learning, development, training, coaching, and they're often used as statements of fact when in fact they're not. And so it behooves us as leaders to check into some of this and look at some of these issues. So just have a think for a minute and jot down, what do you think are some myths of popular psychology that you might be holding on to? Interesting thing when you start thinking about that. So, I mean, psychology is all around us. There's always reports on it. But we don't actually have, I mean, the book describes it, we don't have a dependable tour guide. And why do these myths matter? Let's start with that. Well, some of these myths can actually mislead us about human nature, which can lead to misunderstandings, but it can also lead us to make unwise decisions in our everyday lives. If you think and believe that people typically repress memories of painful experiences, how does that lead you to interact with yourself and others differently? So if you didn't believe that, and that's one of the myths. If you believe that happiness is determined mostly by external circumstances, which is another myth, then you might be led to focus on external things rather than internal things in search of happiness. So these myths are important. Another aspect of myths, and a particularly dangerous one, is where you get the dichotomizing myth, the either or myths. So I'm sure we've all heard the one is you're either right-brained or left-brained. When in fact the research on the differences between the right brain and the left brain were based on people whose corpus callosum had been severed, so they only had access to one part. And the reporting of that research didn't capture that in people who do have that connection, both parts act in an integrated fashion and are only relatively better or stronger or faster at certain things than others. And that in fact, both parts of the brain can be creative, both parts of the brain can handle language, both parts of the brain can do that because the brain acts in an integrated way. And that right-brained versus left-brained dichotomy has led a lot of people down the wrong pathway. And anything that goes to binary as a myth is particularly dangerous for us as leaders. And in fact, binary thinking is particularly dangerous for us as leaders. And I'll tell you why. Okay. When you have a binary situation, yes, no, right-brained, left-brained, there's no room between those two options for discussion, exploration, and actually the reality of human existence. If you were to say instead that in these situations, I use my the strengths that reside primarily in my left brain, okay, or I prefer these situations, it's very different. You've got more flexibility. I like to use the example of when you're riding a horse. Don't know if any of you have ever ridden a horse. Okay, so let's say the horse is walking and you want it to stop. You could look at it as walk, stop. It's binary. So it's walk, stop, and it's not a lot you can do with that. But if you think about the walk as having 3 different paces of walk, and that between walk and stop, there's fast walk, there's medium walk, there's a slow walk, and then there's a not walking stage. You've got a lot more room to play with and explore. Now, the dichotomizing is particularly dangerous because it leads us to start thinking in terms of either or. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Well, most of us have a bit of both. Okay. Are you, and we can behave in both ways. Are you with us or against us? Okay. Are you, it's a very restrictive way of thinking. And as a leader, one of our roles is to enable people to be the best they can be in the workplace and for our team. That's in our interests and theirs. So why would we want to be putting people into an either or box? Okay. So the right brain, left brain discussion is a great one about that. It's like, are you creative or are you logical? Well, I'm sorry, but I score high on both. And that question doesn't give room for when am I creative? When am I logical? Where do I see the value in being either of those things? Is there an appropriate time to be creative, usually at the beginning of a project? And is there an appropriate time to be logical and systematic when we're planning the implementation? Okay. So you miss all those nuances if you could think dichotomously. So here's a challenge for you. Take a look at some of the latest things that have been reported and see how many false dichotomies you can spot. Okay. Now, what we'll be doing in some of the future vlogs is we'll be looking at some specific myths and pulling them apart. And yeah, there are some classic ones here. People's responses to ink plots tells us a great deal about their personalities. Not proven. Okay. Lie detectors are accurate. Not proven. Okay. Intelligence tests are biased against certain groups of people. Now, there's an interesting one. We'll look into that one definitely. Okay. But most of these things are where it's a black and white statement. Yeah. And I'd like to suggest that as a leader, one of the best things we can be is a contingency theorist. Now, a contingency theorist is someone who says, well, it depends. So am I logical or creative? Well, it depends. Do I think that psychiatric labels cause harm by stigmatizing people? Well, it depends. Sometimes it does, sometimes they're useful. And it's those dependencies that are where the essence of leadership sits. And understanding those dependencies is what's crucial. So we'll take a look at some of these myths in future, but a couple of heads up for you. Watch out for those false dichotomies and think to yourself, whenever anybody says, are you X? Think, it depends. Or is someone a good performer? Well, it depends. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. What are those contingencies? What does it depend on? And then you've got information for acting. Okay, Kathy Syed for the Confident Leader Journey here. Come and find us and ask questions. And the Confident Leader Journey community on Facebook, it's a private group. Join in, and we'll see you there. Take care.